Hello and welcome, dear listeners. You're tuning in to the ReGENERATE project podcast on regenerative agriculture. Join us as we explore new approaches to soil, landscape, and the future of farming. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Your host, Radim Kužel.
Hello, today we welcome Jan Basař from Basař's farm, operating in Prosečné in Podkrkonoší. Hi Honza, it's great to have you here. Could you please introduce your farm?
A very good day to the listeners, and hello, Radim. We farm in Prosečné, in Vrchlabí, in Podkrkonoší, and in the village of Prosečné. We manage around 500 hectares of agricultural land, roughly half and half. In our case, that means that half of the fields are meadows, and the other half is arable land, where we grow both market crops and stock feed for cattle, and also a biogas plant, because we operate a 250 kilowatt biogas plant, where we use the heat and electricity again in the guest house we run, and we provide some agricultural services and meat processing, where we have our own slaughterhouse and an automated shop in Vrchlabí and on the farm.
In your experience, what sorts of crops do you grow on your own farm?
Well, among those market varieties, the ones you would commonly think of as the classics, the staples include wheat, rapeseed, and triticale. In spring, we plant oats, poppy, and so on, as farmers often discuss. And now, for roughly the second year in a row, our main crop is the one called cover crop, which we are growing.
That nicely ties in with the topic of our podcast, which is regenerative agriculture, where cover crops are among the main principles and concepts. How did you come to regenerative farming, which you've been practicing for 3 years?
Well, back in the year 2022, we actually tried for the first time in autumn using a borrowed tool to sow directly into clover, which is harvested in autumn. And that's basically where it all began for us back then, indeed.
And in fact, this is regenerative agriculture. Why did you decide to go in this direction here?
Well, we were trying to find a practical way not to convert every single field into pasture. We simply have one lone field on the flat ground, while all the others lie on the hills. For many long years now since the revolution, we have been steadily shrinking the fields, regrassing them, and over the next year again, saving a little more space for grass. And because of what is happening outside, the climate crisis with heavier downpours, not only in summer, but also in October, and increasingly these days in February. So it seemed like we would have to seed everything or simply find some other way that we could not even begin to imagine what it might be. And then suddenly, within the farming public, the word regenerative agriculture began to be more common and spoken. So we started to take a bit more interest in what it means, as we started to gather information about what it is all about.
And what does this alternative farming mean for you in today's rapidly changing world?
Nowadays, in 2025, that means we've already got a solid seed drill for direct sowing, commonly known as no-till. It means the inclusion or addition of one of the main crops in addition to the normal sequence, namely a carefully selected cover crop that we sow, which quite decisively takes priority over rapeseed, which is sown as soon as possible after harvesting the previous crop's yield. And this marks a shift in farming practice. Some kind of gradual reduction in fertilizers, but when we traveled around Europe and spoke to farmers, there is indeed some sort of transitional period that many growers mention, a phase that is being discussed and tested in field practice. It's probably a 5-year period, and we're in the 3rd year, so we aren't yet making dramatic changes to crop care, i.e., fertilizing and the use of fungicides, insecticides, and herbicides, though some advances have already been made, and perhaps to guide policy and practice across different crops and climates and farming setups.
So your approach is something like you gradually try to slip into regenerative farming, but you reduce inputs over time, while at the same time you kind of scale back soil processing. It isn't that, say, you'd suddenly dive in, planting directly on 100 plots and cutting fertilizers and fungicides. Would you call that a slow, gradual transition over many years?
Indeed, it is a slow, step-by-step transition, but by far the most drastic part is that as early as the year 2023, when we first saw the winter wheat crop that had been sown in the autumn of 2022, in 2023 we sold off all the plows and cultivators we had in the yard and went ahead and bought the seed drill. And we still have discs for shallow tillage there, so we can rely on those if necessary because we run a livestock farm and a biogas plant, so the digestate and the manure must be worked into the soil to a depth of about 3 centimeters. But otherwise, we are trying to operate everything directly, sowing straight through, which this spring has proven to us completely unbelievable. It was perfect.
And when I come back to the point that in the sub-mountain region you have, let's say, somewhat steeper land, did you have to fight any erosion at all? Do you see any real benefit in the fight against erosion, less erosion, compared with when you farmed conventionally, plowing and doing some soil work? Is the soil already in a better state, or do you still have some erosion episodes?
That was precisely what settled it. Why, in the spring of 2023, we sold that plow and cultivator. For that was the main effect. That we managed to save diesel in the autumn, that we did not disc the clover, did not break up the lumps, did not prepare it twice, sowed it, did not Cambridge it, and we simply sowed into it. So that was the whole point, more or less, and had lasting effects on our farming overall. An incredible peculiarity in progress, but then a storm broke, or there was a rapid thaw on New Year's Eve, and we deliberately subjected it to a careful, controlled test on the most erosion-prone field that was best suited for turf establishment. The water simply flowed across the surface as the snow melted away, and it did not bite into the soil nor carve out any noticeable erosional feature, such as a small erosion channel or anything of that kind, which would indicate any erosion under those particular conditions. So that was the decision, and it goes on still, and it keeps getting better all the time in other fields.
We're filming at the moment, in fact, in June 2025 right now as we speak. There have recently been somewhat stronger storms across the Czech Republic, it seems. We've seen a number of places across the Czech Republic where that erosion has really occurred. I want to ask how it looked at your place. Was there erosion in your region from those rains, or not?
Well, it happened in a quarter of an hour, 28 millimeters, about 10 days ago, or perhaps 14. And whenever it wakes people at night, or farmers in particular, when the storm bangs on the roof, the first thing in the morning is to go out to the fields to see how the crops are doing, and especially how the soil is faring and its appearance, the height of the stems, leaf color, and soil moisture too. And what I can say, I think that starting this month, we can simply sleep easy because this morning we went around a poppy field which had been sown this spring. In short, it's a large erosion-prone crop, and this time it was without erosion. And above all, we always go and check the places where erosion has always been over the years. Then maize, we're not yet at the stage of sowing it no-till, although we've already seen that it's possible, but we're giving it 5 years. We have sown strip-till into the stubble after triticale, so again without erosion. Another dreaded crop was the erosion-prone broad bean, which we have sown into the stubble also under triticale, no-till directly again with it. And it has even managed to retain water that was running off from neighbors' fields of conventionally established maize, so it could hold it, filter the soil, and leave it on our field. That is very interesting to us.
So you could say that regenerative agriculture works in the fight against erosion, which is also a topic that is being widely discussed right now among the Czech agricultural public as the new erosion regulation is on the way, where this direct sowing, specifically strip-till and other soil protective technologies should be used more by farmers on erosion-prone lands in the fight against erosion. So could you confirm from your own experience that it works, and that farmers, even conventional ones, should not fear these practices because they work and they really prevent erosion?
That is exactly what it resolves, and this here is the most important matter it resolves for us here, in our present situation. The other effects it brings, this living soil here, when today you poke into the soil with a tool, it is something entirely different. These are sewers. It is basically like drainage pipes from those worms and from those roots. So the water not only is held back, but is kept back very effectively. I think we had planned to make ponds in the past, but we've now somewhat abandoned that idea because not much would flow into those ponds. We can manage, we think. After 5 years, when we look at the soil's condition in the third year, I think After 5 years, we will actually keep everything on the surface. Of course, it will not keep a flood, but yes, it will rain. Normally, about half of the storm's rainfall will be captured on the field, and that half will run off across the surface, and that is what matters. So we can recommend it. It works unbelievably well.
So you've focused on the soil, improving the gradual organic matter in the soil. As a result, the soil can hold more water, and perhaps that water won't drain into those ponds, which you do not have to make.
Yes, this is how we mean it.
I would like to ask you, please, when you see it, even taking it from the other side, he said the soil here can hold water. Have you already had the chance to see it, for example, during a dry spell, that your crops stayed greener for longer, that they had water available for longer, or have you not yet observed this?
I also think that almost everything in farming is very hard to measure precisely, or at least when what we observe isn't a clearly defined trial, but it is plainly evident. This spring, we had a huge and solid 10 species cover crop, Ficol Autumn Plus. I believe there were 10 species, though I could be mistaken. However, there seems little point in sowing it among the main crop, since there is a place where mustard with Phacelia would fit there, and it would do something on the surface. Here, 5 of the crops grow downwards and another 5 grow upwards, so the soil ends up thoroughly perforated all the way through. The upper part of the mixture eventually froze off. We also grazed part of it with heifers already in the autumn, which meant that we had feed available for about a month and a half. For us, this turned out to be an answer to the economic question of whether the investment in the cover crop pays off, because being able to have beautiful grazing from mid-October through the beginning of December is an additional benefit. But the main thing was that the cover crop winter killed and created a kind of carpet on the field. In the spring, when we were preparing to sow oats and poppy into it, we were worried about doing so. We were afraid that the crop would not manage to grow through the thick coat formed by the cover crop residue. In the end, however, both the oats and the poppy simply pushed through it and emerged without any problem. And now that storm, it simply draws it into the green manure between the crops. It's still there to some extent. And although earthworms have plenty to do because everything is pulled down into the soil for harvest, there is only half of that green manure left there. But basically, it's like moss in a forest. It's saturated. After the storm, it's soaked for several days. And that carryover, the crop draws water from it. It didn't soak in. It didn't dry out in 2 hours like in Bornite.
So crops are doing well again, there's nothing to worry at all either. You mentioned earthworms. So that's basically one of the animals you keep, I'd say, on the farm, quite obviously. You also have beef cattle, I suppose. Farmers often somewhat fear regenerative farming or the technique of direct sowing. Their common question is what I'll do with the manure, what I'll actually do with organic manures, how I'll incorporate them if I should not till the soil. But that isn't the case, in fact. There is some light processing going on there, how you treat the manure and how you mix it into some amount.
First of all, this step must be taken because the current legislation has not yet managed to respond to permit manure or digestate to be placed within cover crops. Therefore, we have found a workable and practical solution. We will work it into the soil to a depth of exactly 3 centimeters, and afterwards sow either the cover crop or the oilseed rape or the winter wheat. So we carry out shallow compaction there. According to our information and experience from farmers in the West, 3 centimeters is not a problem to move with, because there are earthworms there that tolerate it up to 5 centimeters. There are some earthworms that do not like it, and others that seem quite unfazed by such movement.
And when I get back to those earthworms, have you perhaps compared and counted how many earthworms there are, or have you not got around to it yet? Has the number of earthworms grown, or you don't know?
Well, it grew. It grows when it is harvested. We didn't count them. But when we harvest one spade, it simply swarms there, and above all, they are intensifying. So I suppose we'll probably have to redo butchery, not only beef, but also for the purpose of processing earthworms, perhaps. Just joking.
If I were to raise one more topic for discussion, which could also put off a substantial number of farmers from regenerative agriculture, that could be the issue with voles and pests, which have the potential to cause substantial damage to those crops across many farms. What are your experiences with voles, or rather, are you fighting it in any way? What methods do you use to combat the vole?
That is what we think, But again, those are the periods when everyone has them, and then a moment later, no one has them. We have probably experienced that very period when they were everywhere, and as we began with that regenerative approach, it naturally seemed to us that there were perhaps more of them, maybe. Perhaps they are here a little earlier than on plowed fields. Perhaps there are as many of them there in the end anyway. But it seems they are earlier there indeed if you think about it carefully. The various things that can be used include Stutox, and we've also bought Rodinator, which is a device you walk around with, and their burrows somehow explode. But we felt that this was all a short-term solution, extremely time-consuming and labor-intensive indeed for the time being. So, quite miraculously, we finally discovered an ornithologist who is also a very skilled carpenter. We set up a 5-meter wide strip between the fields, 5 meters wide dwellings. He made us bird boxes, and on them we installed boxes. And now at the weekend, I checked the growths, and I have photos and footage showing that this year new birds of prey have flown out of the boxes, which circle over the fields. So I think we have it solved long term, and in fact, naturally. So we're looking forward to not having to deal with the demanding things with Stutox and Rodinator.
So, one of the solutions, and perhaps the very best, would be to work with nature, and all the farming community should help a little to restore some natural refuges for these predators, so that the battle against voles would in effect be natural.
And rather than buying Stutox, we gave the master carpenter the money. And the good thing is that the problem is solved for the future, and I believe that even for forever.
And another thing that will also be of interest to many farmers who may be considering regenerative farming in practice: how is the economics of your farm's operation after these 3 years of running it today? Do you see savings, or on the other hand, larger costs? Many people fear that yields will be lower. How are things on your end?
We're not some big-time number crunchers. We don't do economic analyses, though it would probably be worth quantifying it one day. But when I imagine how many hours either we or some of our part-time workers have spent in those tractors in the autumn, carrying out the field work, plowing, tillage, seedbed preparation, sowing, and other activities, it's not only the tractor, it's not only the person sitting there. They want the money too. Primarily the diesel fuel that is pumped into there, and that is the iron that wears away, and those tines keep being ordered all the time. But it is also about the servicing and maintenance because they do not log the engine hours. And then when the service van comes onto the yard to service that tractor, it can cost tens of thousands, and suddenly those vehicles end up being driven far less, not going as often, because the engine hours simply aren't there. So those savings really do add up, and those simple measures, as I keep saying, we've shaved off 100 weight of something. Let's call it that for now, which is a useful improvement in our day-to-day farming practice. For now, though, it will work as long as the soil begins to function properly. As long as it is living there fully, then I think the most expensive fertilizers are the ones that will gradually be brought down, and this means we can plan with more certainty and cut waste and risk over the coming seasons. This year we've already saved on herbicide, where we sowed rapeseed with cover crops that managed to smother the weeds, so we used half as much herbicide, which is a sign that the approach is taking hold across our fields. This year we will once again be trying a number of further experiments aimed at removing insecticides, at reducing their use in crops, such as rapeseed. And yes, you can save a lot with that. However, above all, there remains the erosion here in our region, because this is the riddle which is in fact the most feared and the largest potential solution for dealing with it.
You are also a member of the ASZ presidency. One of the topics is indeed that erosion, and you also attend those meetings with the ministry. Do you see from the Czech ministry or the EU any sign they really want to listen more to regenerative farming or move towards that? Or are they for now rather serious about it, knowing it exists? What do you think?
There are around 30 defined soil conservation technologies that a farmer can use, and I don't know how to say it. The simplest thing would be to leave it to the farmer and let everyone do what they want. Let them sort it out as they wish, but just so there is no erosion here. If anyone wants, let them seed it with weeds, make strips, reduce the field, or use a selection of 30 soil conservation technologies. We've chosen what I would call the most drastic and far-reaching approach across the entire area, because today we carry it out in exactly this way on 100 fields of arable land. And to be honest, it works. It works both for erosion and for the economy. And the yields this year on our crops look incredibly impressive.
So on your end, are there only positives or any downsides too?
Well, as for the negative aspects, I do not see any fundamentally real negatives at all. The positives far outweigh them, so whenever a negative arises, for example, something like mice or the like, it can simply be resolved. Slugs, people say there will be more, but we were always simply afraid of the rapeseed crop, so we threw granules against the slugs. It does not seem to us that there are notably more on the regenerative fields. Perhaps they have even been observed in the spring this year as well, which would not usually be the case, but still, this is such a tiny little thing that the benefits far outweigh it by many times over.
And if you had to give one piece of advice for farmers who are doing conventional farming right now and who are considering regenerative, what would you advise them to do in this situation then?
The most important thing about getting over it is to reframe it in your head, clearly and calmly. Without that, it simply won't work. The plow and harrow in the yard mustn't be there, and it won't stay like that now. The changes will be huge. Today, after 2 or 3 years, I can say that the approach has changed a lot. We are traveling across the Czech Republic in a car with my brothers, for instance. We spot a tractor with a plow, and we don't notice that it's really just plowing away our fields. That was always for us the loveliest job, because it changes the look of the countryside. It's a beautifully rough, glorious task. But we can see what this does to it. The drainage, the worms, the roots, everything that was done there during that year is totally devastated, and we have to start all over again and again, year after year with each season. Today we're seeing what we didn't think was possible, whether it can be changed as quickly as it is in our heads. So don't be afraid and just do it then.
Also, you can see, for instance, in the field, when you sow straight into cover crop, it isn't exactly the usual sort of garden a farmer is used to. So, as you mentioned, mindset, or simply seeing the field a bit differently, is perhaps really the hardest part.
Well, this is a terrible Saigon. We drove around because we don't own all the land ourselves. Some of it is leased from other people, and we went round when we were paying rents to the owners, explaining to them what regenerative agriculture is, and that on those fields it will look a little different, perhaps than they are used to, so they won't be alarmed or stressed, and that the results which we have thankfully managed to present to them please them, that the mix-up is resolved, we won't be taking money away from their fields.
So, do the owners view it positively? Or have you also come across someone who, on the other hand, found it to be against their taste and they favored the conventional?
Not here with us, no, not here with us. We have one single, fairly sizable owner who we are renting a sizable field from, and we have thoroughly explained this to him, and I think that he is genuinely glad that it works this way, because he still rents out to the neighbors, and there he already notices how it looks in practice.
And when that happens to the rest of the people in the village you farm in or in nearby villages, how do you react? Or did they react? By now, after a few years, they've learned what you're doing there on those fields, why you're doing it, and they probably see the results.
Well, now you've reminded me, which is good. We're still talking about the agricultural professional public, like simply who should or shouldn't do what. But we should also think about the people. Those laymen from the village, we heard that they were discussing this topic on a football pitch over a beer. They were saying that the stream is somewhat clean. Back when it rained in autumn last year, the stream was simply clear water, not dirty, and there seemed to be a bit less of water comparing to the years before. And it wasn't really what you'd call the thing most noticed by fellow villagers about the stream. And I think some people noticed, as a few of them said, when it runs between those fields. Basically, since September, everything was bare, brown, plowed, or freshly sown, so brown again. And today it's either a deer yard or in a moment it will be green. And now it's green. Or when there are flowers blooming there in November. It's swarming with beetles, birds, and butterflies. And a beekeeper came along and suddenly brings 12 bottles of honey for us. We were thinking, is he crazy? And he said that no one had ever done this for them. But we said we haven't done much for them either. We've done it for our fields. It was really nice.
So it basically has that sort of social reach, let's say the regenerative farming, which shows that it is in fact one of the paths that could be a kind of solution for the future of agriculture in Europe. I thank you for today's interview. I wish you much success with this year's harvest. I hope the harvest will be a good one for you, and I look forward to our next meeting.
Many thanks and take good care.
Project ReGENERATE is funded by the European Union. Views and opinions expressed are, however, those of the authors only and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. Neither the European Union nor the Executive Agency can be held responsible for them.